Hello, this is Christopher Taylor with Sovereign Harmony. Welcome back to my channel. I'm coming in to check in on the month of March. Today is Thursday, February 27th, and March, of course, is just 2 days away on Saturday, March 1st. So I've got a list of some of the main events of this month, and this is a very, very potent month with retrogrades and eclipses and all the good stuff happening. So it's definitely a transitory month. So I've been talking about this since the beginning of 2025, and now we are here. So um, just to get started, so don't take too much of your time, Venus turns retrograde this Saturday, March 1st. 11 degrees Aries. I want you to pay attention to those degrees because as we talk about Mercury retrograde, the solar eclipse all happening here this month. It's all right around that same zone in Aries. And Aries, of course, is the first sign of the zodiac, represents new beginnings, okay? The start of things, okay? But you can't have the start of things without the end of other things, right? And that's really where we're at, is this transition zone, a major transition zone, where we've got planets retrograding from the first sign of the zodiac back into the last sign of the zodiac. We also have a major outer planet transitioning from the last sign of the zodiac that it rules, Neptune rules Pisces, and into Aries. So it's really the end of an era. It's really some permanent changes on the horizon. But if we take it piece by piece and then link it all together, it'll make a little more sense. So I'm going to start with this Venus retrograde at 11 degrees Aries. That's what it looks like. There's Venus right here. Okay. Notice it's very close to the moon. The moon will be in Aries on Saturday as well, within a couple degrees of where Venus will be at 10 degrees and 50 minutes of Aries when it turns retrograde Saturday. And it's also going to be in a wide square, about 6 degrees off of an exact square from Mars, which is freshly direct. Okay, so Mars went direct on Sunday. That was on the 23rd. So it had been retrograde since December 6th. Now it's finally direct motion, and it's moving slowly right now, but it will pick up some steam in the coming weeks. And it's just interesting. We've had this very brief window between Mars turning direct on Sunday the 23rd, and then now Venus turning retrograde on March 1st. It's only about 5 or 6 days. And so in that window, every planet is in direct motion. So it didn't last very long. Okay, so I'm not sure if you've gotten anything to move forward with a little extra speed this week, but that was a brief opportunity to get that going for you. But what's interesting about this is with Venus, conjunct the moon, squaring Mars, the moon is in Aries, and it's the ruler of Cancer. Mars is in Cancer, and it's the ruler of Aries. So they're kind of exchanging energies in a lot of ways, and it's kind of like a mutual reception of sorts. Okay, and so that just kind of amplifies the energy of sort of Mars and Moon together, which is cranky. That's kind of the first thing that comes to mind. With Mars and Cancer in general, that's the moodiness and the crankiness, and especially when it was retrograde. And so there is a sense of this Venus retrograde wanting to move through some old stuff. What is the stuff that keeps us cranky, that keeps us locked into the past, for example? Okay, so it's going to be diving into the past. Venus retrogrades generally are about diving into like past relationships. A lot of times people from our past show up suddenly. Like all of a sudden someone's in your inbox, or you run into someone out there, or someone calls you or texts you or something that you haven't heard from, or thought was long gone, for example. So it is a time of going back. It's usually pretty karmic, okay, with Venus going retrograde. And in this particular Venus retrograde, with that relationship to the moon and Mars, it is a little bit more specific about going back to kind of like things we haven't let go of in relationships that prevent us from getting close, okay, prevent us from being truly able to connect. So it really is diving into those layers that we've caked onto ourselves in a way to protect ourselves. And so it's an opportunity to peel back those layers. And because Venus wants to move into that new energy of Aries, it's got to go back to Pisces before it can do that, to get into that stuff and to ultimately release it. Okay. Also, Venus will be in a sextile to Jupiter, which is also direct in Gemini And so that's going to have a way of like really putting things in a bigger picture, long range scope. So if we're going back over old relationship patterns or actual individuals that we've been close to but aren't anymore, things like that, it's going to help us to engage with it in a way that will open up the future in a more in a more easier, just an easier manner, essentially. In also opening up to new ways with Jupiter and Gemini, it's if we can get at our habits, get at our addictions, essentially, like what draws us to people and why, that's going to be really valuable because we have a chance to kind of erase that slate and move toward the future with more possibility, more openness, more sense of options, etc. So very important for this Venus retrograde that we address those things. Okay. Next thing on our list is the eclipse, lunar eclipse. It's going to be a south node lunar eclipse, 24 degrees Virgo. It'll happen on the 14th for most people. I am on the West Coast, so it is technically late at night on the 13th, but it happens, which actually happens to be my birthday. And I was actually born during a lunar eclipse in Virgo at 23 degrees on March 13th, way long ago. So it's interesting. It's kind of probably going to be a significant year for myself. But anyway, how this looks for everybody. There's that moon right there in Virgo with the south node, pretty tight. And on the other side is the north node with the sun and Saturn and Neptune. And it will be forming so the sun will be forming a trine to Mars, the moon a sextile to Mars, and then the opposite formations to Uranus. So it'll be a trine from the moon, sextile from the sun. So both Uranus and Mars are involved in this. And this really has a lot to do with release. In general, a south node lunar eclipse, so where the moon lands, whether it lands on the north or the south node in an eclipse, that tells us, which type of eclipse it is. This is a south node eclipse, which has to do with release. Lo and behold, we're talking about all these, this shift from the last sign of the zodiac to the first, and how we have to, release that stuff for good with the last sign of the zodiac, Pisces, in order to move forward. So we have this release. In this case, it's a release of old patterns, old habits, old routines, structures, things, things that the need to have things under a certain level of control. That's a big part of the release. I mean, just in general, in the 18-month period with the North Node in Pisces, South Node in Virgo, that's the theme. This just amplifies it to the highest level, where the focus starting in mid-March is, hey, let's get rid of those patterns, those rigid schedules, those rigid expectations and controls that we think we need to have. And especially with the Venus retrograde, this probably has a lot to do with how we relate to other people. Okay, so any rigidity, we really want to be focusing on releasing at this point. And it's all about with Saturn and Neptune on the other end here. What we're establishing is a more solid representation of our ideals in that realm. So getting more into trusting ourselves and having that form the foundation of our decision making and what we choose in relationship, for example. So like if we're going back with the Venus retrograde to go over old patterns, why do we attract certain types of people that always that don't work out? This is basically establishing something more along the lines with our ideals in a more solid manner, in alignment with our intuition. So letting ourselves feel our way through relationships rather than try to put them in a certain box, which is what those old Virgo habits tend to be, right? And with the connection to Mars and Cancer, we talked about that with the Venus retrograde, forming that square to Mars and Cancer. We have to do this if we want to move forward in alignment with our hearts, in alignment with our true intuitive knowingness. Okay, that's a must. Okay, and with Uranus here in Taurus, supporting this eclipse as well, it is about moving toward the future, something new. Okay, so it's the whole theme of pretty much all the pieces this month is that final release to move into the new. Okay, but it has to happen in certain levels, certain layers, etc. So that is that one. Then next on the list is pretty much the next day, Mercury turns retrograde. Just like Venus turned retrograde here at 11 degrees Aries. Mercury turns retrograde at 10 degrees Aries. So it's both retrogrades are going to cover the same ground. They're going to go from, the first 10 or so degrees of Aries back into the last 5 or so degrees of Pisces before they turn direct. Okay, so how that looks over here. Now, there is Mercury, and notice Venus retrograde with a little R right there. So Venus, was ahead of Mercury, and since it turns retrograde here on March 1st, 2 weeks later, it's going to be, well on its way back, heading towards Pisces, but it'll be close enough to Mercury as Mercury turns retrograde that we can kind of consider them working together in a sense. And just like Venus was forming that sextile to Jupiter and Gemini, so is Mercury, because Mercury is at a very similar degree to Venus where it's turning retrograde. So again, this speaks to, clearing the space so that we can open up more options, more flexibility. Okay. So get rid of that rigidity, open up to flexibility. So a new way of relating. And so this, we're kind of operating both on our minds, Mercury, and on a heart level with Venus. So we're really clearing that slate mentally and emotionally so that we can embrace options that we wouldn't otherwise consider because they don't fit into our rigid little boxes. Okay. And so very similar, those planets are going to be retrograde in the same part of your chart. So wherever you have, say, like 25 degrees Pisces to about 10 degrees Aries, plus or minus, that area is where you're going to be having the most review on a mental and emotional level, and that kind of revival of how we communicate our feelings, and things of that nature. So on to the next. Now we come to the solar eclipse. That'll be March 29th, so at the very end of the month. And that's at 9 degrees Aries. Again, very close to where Mercury and where Venus turn retrograde. What's also interesting, while we're on that note, the degree of the lunar eclipse at 24 degrees Virgo will be exactly opposite, pretty much within a couple degrees, of where both Venus and Mercury will turn direct in Pisces. Okay, so they'll turn direct right around 24 to 26 degrees Pisces, just exactly opposite. So where the sun was essentially during that eclipse. And so when that happens in early to mid-April, really that theme of this lunar eclipse we talked about with the big release and letting go of the rigid patterns, that is going to culminate in early to mid-April when Venus and Mercury turn direct, because they will be conjunct Saturn and the North Node, just like the sun in this lunar eclipse situation was conjunct Saturn and the North Node, etc. So it's all kind of one big process. It's going to take several weeks to unfold, but early to mid-April will be that kind of release point. But right before we get to that point where they release, we'll have this solar eclipse just to see how that looks. So here it is right here. There is the sun and the moon. They're right just before 9 degrees of Aries. And it's hard to see here because these are a lot closer together than they look. They just don't have enough room to put them all in there. But that North Node is technically conjunct. It's a wide conjunction, but it's technically conjunct this new moon, which is why it's an eclipse. Okay. And then Saturn will actually be fairly close to an exact conjunction to the North Node. Okay. And also what will be happening there, I wanted to highlight, is the ruler of this solar eclipse, ruler of Aries, is Mars. There it is in Cancer still. And that will be squaring pretty tightly to Chiron in Aries. And that has been an ongoing, angsty kind of energy that we've been dealing with since about mid-October. So mid-October, Mars made its first pass with a square to Chiron. Then it retrograded and it made a second pass. And now it's going to make its final pass as we finish up March. Okay. So this really speaks to like getting things out of our system. Okay. Getting old wounds up and out. Okay. And so we've been doing that since mid-October in the background. And then the whole Mars retrograde, was, that was a big part of that story. And so that ends here, the end of March, with this establishment of new beginnings, because it's a new moon in Aries. Aries, the first sign of the zodiac. This is really just saying, like, what we're clearing Well, we're going to build something else there in its place. And this is kind of that energy of that building the new. And with Saturn on the North Node, it just further emphasizes that idea of, again, a solid future based on our ideals and foundationed on our trust and our willingness to trust the process in a way. Okay. So we're going to be completing something here the end of March into early to mid-April. And when I come back next month to talk about April, that's when we're going to have a better idea of where we're at with that. But biggest thing we can do now is just kind of open up, address old wounds, old patterns, and let them go once and for all to really open up ourselves for the new. And the final thing I have on here is a major transition. We talked about this at the beginning of 2025, the outer planets changing signs. Neptune, ruler of Pisces, has been in Pisces since 2011, long time now. It will enter Aries for the first time in our lives, and it'll be in Aries starting March 30th through October 22nd, and it'll back into Pisces again. Then when it enters Aries, I think in like January, February timeframe, that'll be it. It'll be Neptune and Aries, and it won't be in Pisces again the rest of our lives. Okay, and it'll be in Aries for a good 14, 15 years, something like that. So it's going to be, again, same transect from the last sign of the zodiac to the first sign. So where all these eclipses, these retrogrades are happening, this is also happening. So it also means that these two planets will retrograde and make a few contacts with Neptune in the process, since it's right in its path. Okay, and also that at least the lunar eclipse is opposing that Neptune when it'll still be in late Pisces at that point. So just a quick look at that. Not too much to show on the chart other than to show that here's Neptune at 000 Aries. So that is the Aries point. Okay. And then not to mention, we do have, I didn't put it on here, but we have the equinox in March. I believe it is like March. I'm going to get it right for you. I should have added it in there, but I think it's going to be the 19th or the 18th or 20th. Usually it's around the 20th. So it'll be on Thursday, March 20th. So right kind of in the thick of, right, like kind of the halfway point essentially between the two eclipses, really. So that'll be happening there. And then with Neptune hitting that same point, this is kind of like we get the sun at the 0 degrees Aries point every single, March 20th or whatever. This is kind of like if we have Neptune, it's 160 something year orbit or whatever it is. I can't remember what it is exactly. But this is like the March 20th of its larger orbit, right? So it's kind of like a double equinox in a way on a Neptunian level. So this Neptune and Aries, it's a whole new world in a lot of ways, kind of like Pluto entering Aquarius back in November. So we're in the midst of some pretty major changes. I think that's pretty obvious looking around, seeing what's happening, seeing the kind of the crumbling of the old guard around us, and the crumbling of authoritative structures that were so much associated with all the Capricorn energy with Pluto and Capricorn, and the most recent Saturn and the Neptune cycle that started in Capricorn in 1989. And so it's all coming to a crumble once Saturn and Neptune hit that Aries point. That'll be in February of 2026. They'll hit that point together, and that will be really the start of a kind of a whole new world essentially. So we're in the final months, if you want to look at it like that, because here we are in late February this year. So by like mid to late February next year, that's going to happen. We're going to get the Saturn Neptune conjunction, 0 degrees Aries, and it's kind of like going to be like the rubber stamp that says the old world is dead. It's going to be the beginning of, not that it hasn't started yet, but the idea of people taking self-responsibility for their beliefs and and what they believe to be true about reality. So no longer being able to dictate it from above. Narratives are dying essentially. I'll be giving a talk on that in San Diego here in April, just in time, perfect timing for it. If you're in the area, I'll talk about it during my next one next month. But anyway, just to review, both Venus and Mercury retrograding in Aries this month, a couple weeks apart, but at about the same degree. A solar eclipse at the end of the month will be about that same degree as well. A lunar eclipse in mid-month will be opposite the degree that both Venus and Mercury will turn direct in early to mid-April. And then we have the, Neptune crossing that Aries point, just like the sun is going to cross the Aries point on March 20th. And it's like the springtime on a larger scale of things. Okay. So just to review, we got a relationship review period with the Venus retrograde. We're generally paving the way with both Mercury and Venus turning retrograde back into Pisces to make way for this solar eclipse, North Node solar eclipse in Aries, which is kind of us moving forward. And it's really a time of permanent change. That's signified by Neptune entering Aries. Again, it will back into Pisces again in the fall, but once we get into early 2026, that's really where things kind of move forward. So thanks for joining me. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Feel free to comment, share, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Again, thanks for joining me, and we will see you again next month.